Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining this afternoon's session, Maintaining Integrity in a World Without In-Person Verification. I am Helen Harrison with the Northwest Eco Building Guild's Summit Planning Committee. Just a quick note for better viewing on this presentation, you can minimize your chat bar off to the right, and you can also enlarge any image on the screen by clicking the 4 arrows in the top right corner of that screen. I'd like to take a moment to honor the land we currently occupy. On behalf of the Northwest Eco Building Guild, we acknowledge that we're all on traditional land of the first people of this region. We honor with gratitude the land itself and thank the tribal people who have been faithful stewards of the land, water, and ancient history of life. Here in Seattle, where I am, we are on the land of the Duwamish. Peace, dignity, and equality on a healthy planet. This from the United Nations is simply stated, but deeply resonates with our committee as we think about you and the need in our communities at this moment. We believe that you all are part of a group of people to set an example for how to support one another and move through this time together to arrive in a better place. Next, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We've got our sustaining sponsors, Dunn Lumber, King County Green Tools, and Pharos Creative. Additionally, we have our supporting sponsors, and there are far too many to mention, but we thank them all and couldn't do this event without them. And finally, thank you to our contributing sponsors. All of our sponsors have helped make this event possible. Before we get started, just a few more housekeeping notes for you. As we finish our presentation, you'll see a floor like on the screen below. I think by now most of you are familiar with Remo, but if not, please ask somebody at your table for help. If something really doesn't seem right, you can try moving to another table or leaving the meeting and coming back in altogether. If you have mic and camera issues, you can go to the top left corner for the 3 horizontal bars and do a check on your camera and mic. And you can also get help from one of our hosts. You can look at the yellow star in the upper right-hand corner there in the enlarged image. Now I am excited to introduce Dan Wildenhaus, a person who needs no introduction from me really and is a longtime friend of the Guild. Dan, if you can turn on your microphone and camera and come on stage with me, I will let you take the stage.
Okay, thank you. Quick mic check. Can you hear me okay? I don't hear a yes or a no.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. And next, I believe I'm going to share my screen. So fingers crossed that this works just the way we want it.
We will let you know if it doesn't.
Oh, I was just going to say too, we're going to save our questions till the end. Unless there's a clarifying question, we'll interrupt and ask the clarifying question.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. I hope you've had a great day so far. It's been a busy one for me as well. And I am a long-term fan and friend of the Guild. And I've had many roles, whether it's been a member, it's been on the board, various committees over the years. It's always pleasurable for me to be here. Today, I am representing Better Built Northwest. We are a project that NEA puts out there to help encourage above code construction across the Northwest region. And we do that by hiring people like me to do presentations, do education. We run a website, and every other year we run a conference ourselves called the Home Efficiency Forum. So keep your eyes peeled for any and all opportunities to integrate and work with myself. And I'm happy to see many of you that I already know here today. So with that, let's jump on in. So as mentioned, we're going to talk about maintaining integrity in a world without in-person verification. This has become a pretty big deal recently. But one of the challenges is that, isn't it odd that we as humans, we tend to learn and build and make the future better when we fail, as opposed to looking at our successes, right? If a building falls down, we do a really critical analysis of why did that building fall down? Let's not do that again. But how many times have we looked at a building that's 150 or 200 years old and said, what is it about this building that's continuing to make it last? And so I want us to think about this. There's some pretty obvious reasons why in-person verification is challenging right now, but I want us to be thinking about all the reasons that in-person verification could be challenging now or in the future. And what lessons can we learn? What ideas can we bring forward? And at the end, I would really like to get into a discussion and hear your takes on how we can maintain integrity in a world where maybe in-person verification is not as rigorous as it is in a perfect world. So with that, these are our AIA slides, right? So this course does qualify for the continuing education units. Thank you very much to the Passive House Northwest team. Copyright materials, we all understand this. This is the course description. I'm not going to read it all to you, but hopefully this is why you're here. Oh, it looks like I almost got all the automatic forwards done. Here are our course objectives. We're going to try and talk about the intention of why we would do third-party testing or verification. We want to think a little bit about different standards and allowances that exist currently with various programs and codes. Then we'll think about some of the technologies that are available right now to assist us in this and which of these make a lot of sense to carry forward. And then hopefully at the end, we can really have people come up and share personal stories regarding how the changing landscapes of inspections are happening and how we can all contribute to maintaining integrity. So our agenda, we're going to check in on some agreed upon goals for today's discussion. We're going to think about the ideal role a consultant or a rater, a verifier, or inspector has in the built environment. We'll again look at some processes put forth by different entities. We'll again look at those technologies. We'll think about how they apply to the future and really have that discussion at the end, which I really hope you'll all get involved in. So what are we talking about today, right? Verification. What's critical with verification? The words that jump out to me are establishing validity. So let's think about that. If we verify that an insulation system is better than code or is installed to best practices, we're establishing some validity with that. An inspection is actually just a component, right? It's an action that we do, and it's a careful examination or scrutiny. Some other critical things to kind of level set before we go in, because this is really getting to what do we mean by maintaining integrity here. Quality control, right? So quality control is a system of maintaining standards by testing a sample. And that is different from quality assurance. So with quality assurance, it's attention to every stage for maintaining a desired level of quality. The one that I'm not putting up on the screen is the word quality itself. One of my heroes and mentors, John Tooley, said, quality is meeting your agreed upon standards. So I brought this up because I'm going to come back to this a couple of different times when we look at some examples, both of processes that some programs have in place and some technologies that exist. And I'm going to ask, what is this doing? Is this part of an inspection? Is this part of the bigger picture of verification? And does it speak to quality control or quality assurance? Because all of this is important for us if we're going to propose alternatives and if we're really going to, again, maintain some degree of integrity. So before we go too much further, I'd love to see if folks want to type in the chat would be ideal right now. Is there anything that you are hoping that we're going to talk about today? This is me in 10 years, except for I will not have that much hair, I guarantee you. But I really am kind of curious to see if there are any thoughts from you in the audience on what you're hoping we might talk about. I can't promise we'll get to all of it, but I'd really like to hear it. Remember, you can use the chat or the Q&A. Maybe my list is just so dynamic and covers everything that you guys are like, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Or maybe you've all left the room already, which I jest. I know some of you are hoping that I'll put some good jokes in here. I can tell you I'll do my best. All right, well, I'm not hearing a ton from people right now, what they're hoping we're gonna hear. So I'm just gonna go ahead and blaze forward, but feel free to use the chat or the Q&A and let me know. Okay, we do have one. Ooh, materials. The role data loggers could play. These are great examples. One of them is, I may talk a little bit about the other one. We'll see. We'll see. This is great. Thank you, guys. That's exactly the kind of feedback I was hoping to get. And there we go. So I like to start by thinking about who's ideal, what's the ideal role? Someone who typically has a designation of a rater or a verifier or an inspector for a program, right? So this is something that the Building America team put out a number of years ago. And I love it because it's overly optimistic. I was a rater for, 14 years. And I don't think I ever got a project where I actually got to do all of the different things that they suggest on the side. But I love the concept of it, right? So early as a decision is being made towards construction, someone with this role is helping to educate the builder about the building science and systems approach. And that's going to include things like educating about what different materials are available, what processes we might want to use. Next, as we're ramping up and getting ready to do construction, I like to think of this as where we're doing things like a design charrette, an early design assistance meeting, along with maybe assisting in writing scopes of work. The idea here is that this person is offering design solutions, including materials and compatibility, and is helping to determine the impact of design solutions. So that could be helping to determine potential energy savings through a decision. Maybe it's helping to understand if the sequencing of construction will need to be different. Let's take that product aero barrier that I'm sure you've heard about. In our group, some of our friends sell this product. But in order to use aero barrier to get a really tight home, you may need to make sure you've built enough time in to bring this in as a specific tool and specific measure you're going to do. So in pre-construction analysis, the rater, the verifier is really helping that builder understand how that's going to fit into the bigger process. During construction, there's going to be a couple different things. Helps to communicate the approach to both the supervisors and all crews and trades, as well as observes construction practices and recommends improvements and offers training. Here's my first check-in. Observing construction practices and recommending improvements, is that quality assurance or is that quality control? I'm going to say that that's quality assurance, right? That's attention to every stage for maintaining a desired level of quality. So quality assurance is something that typically happens as a part of the construction process. So I want us to think about how can we assist in quality assurance if we can't be on the job site as often. In post-construction, we conduct field tests and inspections, maybe including blower doors, duct leakage tests, HVAC system commissioning, and many others, right? And what is this really looking at? Well, this is a step in quality assurance, but now we're getting to some quality control, right? We're doing some sampling of testing. It could be every home. If it's a multifamily building, it could be a sampling of the units, right? So now we're talking about some quality control items. How can we get some of this done if we can't physically be on site? I think it's hilarious that they think that HERS raters have a lot to do with marketing, but we can at the very least provide test results and data and help translate from building science to normal human speak so that marketing teams can actually sell indoor air quality and comfort, indoor environmental quality, sustainability, carbon reduction, be able to sell that in a way that maintains integrity. And then at lessons learned, right, offers help with upgrading production plans and with solar and green community design. So this is taking the lessons that we've learned from the construction and using a feedback loop mechanism to help ensure that the next build goes even better, right? So these are a bunch of the different components that in a perfect world, if you are a verifier, a rater, or a program inspector, that you're following a lot, hopefully, and getting a chance to do a lot of these. So keep these in mind as we continue to go forward. There's always a question of, I think most of us in the room, we've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? We believe that, you get what you inspect, right? Or you get what you test. Those are two slightly different variations on a similar concept. In other words, if no one is looking at it and you're not chronicling it and you're not using feedback loops, are we really sure we're going to get what we thought we were going to get? So there was a group here, SK Collaborative, set out to try and answer some of these questions on behalf of NAHB, right? So they looked at 10 recently constructed or renovated multifamily affordable housing projects in Georgia. And here's some of what they came up with. The analysis, however, identified a number of deficiencies and failures uncovered during the inspection process, right? So examples, insulation failures were some of the things they found. Now, that sounds a lot like we're talking about inspection and some, quality control, right? We were finding some examples and some problems. So that is something that we have to ask ourselves, can we do this level of third-party inspection and quality control if we're not present? They also identified building code failures that were overlooked by officials. So again, this is still quality control, but this is that part where we're already looking beyond what the basic minimums were that were asked of us in our scope of work. And this is that nature of that complete role of the rater or the verifier, right? Having those multiple touch points of communication throughout the process. There's a link, so when the PDF of this gets shared afterwards, you can actually read this entire report. I wouldn't put much more than this on the screen for you, but this is some interesting stuff. They're able to start quantifying real benefits. And this is the NAHB, right? Love them or hate them, their goal is to make a builder's life easier, their members' lives easier. And they typically, they resist code advancing too quickly. They're all for codes helping us get to where we need to be, but they want it to be at a very moderate pace so that builders don't have to be stressed out too much. So for them to invest in this type of assessment and post these types of results, I think is actually pretty telling. So why may we not be able to visit something in person, right? I hinted at this earlier. There's some things that have happened real recently, but have you ever been hired by someone and the project that's happening is 335 miles away from you? It's not going to be very easy for you to pick up and, at a moment's notice, do a quick inspection. You're probably gonna have to plan this well in advance, and you're gonna have to charge appropriately to make sure it happens. What happens when communication isn't great and you show up for a final and the home's occupied? How are you supposed to get in there? You may or may not have a builder who's allowing you to talk to the homeowners, but in many cases, they will absolutely not let that happen without them intervening and scheduling that visit for you. How about inclement weather? Shoot, we live in the Pacific Northwest. It rains sometimes, right? We have wildfires. We actually had down here in where I'm at in Portland, Oregon, several of our construction sites were backed out for a full 2 weeks due to wildfires. And so some of our verifiers were finding that, they were scheduled to go look at Jeremy's construction and look at 3 sites on Thursday. And they got a call on Wednesday saying, by the way, our sites aren't ready. We're 2 weeks behind. Can we move our inspection out 2 weeks? Well, maybe you can move some inspections out 2 weeks, but what happens if you have to move them all out? Now your schedule is completely crunched. So there's a lot of these things. And then now timings with repairs or remediation. So you have to do a re-inspect. And perhaps that's not conducive to when and how you're able to revisit. What about some of the new things? We're starting to see an uptick in panelized and offsite construction elements. That's great if the warehouse or factory that's building them is 60 minutes away or less. But what if it is in another state? What if it's several states away? How are we going to verify that some of the components that were built offsite were actually done correct? All of these are some of the questions that we want to answer. Then, of course, there's COVID-19. So we've seen many repercussions from this, requiring staged construction, meaning no more than 1, maybe 2 crews allowed on a job site at one time. Again, potentially slowing down how construction can happen. You may have a personal or company policy that you are not allowed to attend a job site unless it literally meets every element of the governor's mandate, meaning having hand washing stations and doing staggering construction. So you're in a position you have to decide, do I violate potentially the law and our own business's decisions on how to handle this, or do I urge myself forward? I think it goes way beyond this. And this is where I'd like to think a little bit beyond just some of those basic limitations and think a little deeper here. I want to talk about our workforce. What if someone is very, very tall or very, very small? Would you have the same expectations that they'll literally fit in an attic or a crawl space? Does that make them a not ideal employee for us? This person may have a great eye for detail. They may be a good critical thinker and an excellent communicator and have all the skills that we'd really want for them to be one of our verifiers. But they may be just physically challenged with getting into the right places. What if they're differently abled? Can you imagine if you were a rater and you had a traumatic incident and you were wheelchair bound? Would you still want to be able to do your job? Now, there are some things, maybe energy modeling could be something that you do, but what if you just have a real passion and real great ability to do on-site job communication? That's a real limitation all of a sudden. And what about our workforce as it ages? Just because maybe your knees start giving out doesn't mean that you're not sharp-witted and sharp-minded and really a valuable asset to both the construction industry in general and to your company. So let's think about these things as well, because maintaining integrity is more than just making sure the insulation was installed right, or that the ductless heat pump has been properly commissioned, or the heat pump water heater is located in a room with 700 cubic feet of space of free air around it, right? These kind of things are important, but I really believe taking integrity to that next level to really think about how well can this apply to our workforce. We didn't even bring up language barriers and some other items, different reading levels that have really plagued and pinholed some people in the construction industry into not getting the jobs that they might actually excel at if we had the right processes and technologies in place. So what does the industry itself say about this? Believe it or not, the ICC just came out with their own recommended practices for remote virtual inspections. Again, I'm not going to read everything here. There's a free publication and free download and a really good infographic that you can get for this. But what I like is the simplicity of their concept here, right? They break it into the different categories of scheduling, customer preparation, job site identification, inspection results, and maintaining records. And this is a really terrific way to think about this. This really comes down to, a lot of this is about communication, right? And setting the right expectations. Now, just because the ICC came up with this does not mean that every jurisdiction will be adopting this, but I love the fact that they did come out with it and that they really put it in it's a very communication heavy process that they're recommending. How about ResNet, or the Residential Energy Services Network? So this is the network or trade association for HERS raters, Home Energy Rating System raters that are out there. And these are people this is usually one of the prerequisites for verifiers in our programs, that they have this type of training and that they're a member of this trade association. So they just recently, back in March, they put out an initial exception to their general rules, allowing for virtual verification and remote QA. And then just recently, they've actually extended that with COVID still, showing no signs of going away on its own, as we've learned. They've extended their temporary emergency provisions. And some of these requirements, you can see here, this is really from the QA side, but they're doing something similar for the verification side. They're doing some basic things about, there are still some things that need to be featured, like manometer readings, model numbers, insulation quality, and they have some definitions of the term tester. But they are putting in some things to allow for other qualified individuals being able to be delegated to do some of this work. And that's a pretty critical component here. So the first one was all about communication and process. The same one is identifying the minimum standards and allowing for alternative or other qualified individuals to take on some of the work. The National Green Building Standard. One of their interesting ones is you have to get prior approval before you do something with a virtual verification. They release their own detailed protocol. And their component here is testing is still mandatory. But what their virtual protocol allows for is for testing to be done at a later date, potentially. So a home can be conditionally qualified. And then when it's available, testing can be done. So that is a really different change as well. For the remote options, they also give a couple of things live using things like FaceTime, Google Meet, Facebook Live, using different technologies while you're live and in place is their preferred methodology. But let's face it, a lot of construction sites are in new developments where the internet is not great yet. You may not have 4G LTE or 5G coverage in every place. So they do allow for recorded inspections and photo documentation to be components of this. The Energy Star program, they basically are trying to keep as aligned with ResNet as possible. So originally their policy extended to June 30th, and then they just recently extended that along with ResNet. They're interesting because they don't allow for diagnostic testing defaults for the purposes of Energy Star. ResNet actually does, and I'll show you some examples of defaults. So effectively, if you cannot test every house, but you can test a sampling of them, you can use some defaults on the rest of the homes. Energy Star is not doing that. So they are allowing completion of diagnostic tests to be deferred to a later date at the rater's discretion and in consultation with the builder. So here's a critical thing, this concept of rater discretion or verifier discretion. What we're seeing is people putting some onus on the verifiers to make the decisions that make the most sense for the scenarios that they're in. This is an example from the Energy Performance Score program down in Oregon. I actually help manage this program as well. And you notice here, the exceptions are allowed on a case-by-case basis. So you have to get previous approval. But one of the interesting things here are some of the defaults that we're talking about. So an air change per hour number. If you have history in the subdivision, you can look over the past 100 days and use the average air change per hour number taken during that time to qualify the home for now. It's a standalone home. We also have some other basic numbers you can put in. They do the same for duct leakage. So what we're seeing here, we also though require a lot of photo documentation still. So if you can't be there, that means someone needs to be there. So someone needs to document with photos or videos all of these items. This is a similar list to the photo documentation that ResNet would require. So you're starting to see that there are some similarities and some differences here. In each case, we're looking to do our best to, again, can we maintain integrity in these, right? So if you do photos or videos, what's the biggest challenge? Well, in my mind, knowing that that photo or that video came from that house at that time. So geostamped or geotagged and time-stamped are two requirements that typically are associated with photo or video documentation. So photo documentation and video inspection are going to be some of the critical components. What are some of the lessons that these programs have been learning and sharing right here? We have to be really clear about any one given program. And I'm going to go beyond program. This could be any given builder or any of you who may be designers, maybe consultants, maybe manufacturers or suppliers. What is your value proposition? In other words, what is it about the service or product that you offer that brings great value and helps it stand out from those that don't meet that standard? And what are your core standards? So making sure we're really crystal clear. This has been a great learning lesson for all of those programs and organizations I showed you, because everyone is having to ask themselves, are we clear about our value proposition and our core standards? Because if we are, if we can say we're really crystal clear about this, then we can start building exceptions, allowances, and alternative ways to get us there. So how do we actually do this, right? Here we are, how do we get there? To where we want to be. When I was putting this together, something was in my mind. I don't know if you guys watch South Park, but one of my favorite all-time episodes was with the Underpants Gnomes, right? They have this concept, we're gonna collect underpants, we're gonna make profit. Phase 2, no idea how we're gonna do that yet. And that feels a little bit like that last one, right? We know where we are, we know where we wanna be. How are we going to get there? So photo documentation sounds great, video documentation sounds great, but are there any tools out on the market and products that we could use to actually make this work? So this is the company I actually work for, TRC. And we are an engineering firm on top of being a program implementation and consulting firm. And we do a lot of commissioning and inspections for utilities. And that includes like transformer stations. Heck, we help utilities design how to lay underwater cable across bays, right? So if we're in a position where we cannot visit job sites due to COVID-19 in this case, how is it that one of our engineers can do an inspection when they can't be there? Well, we actually have been partnering with Vuzix Glasses. This is kind of like that super smart glasses, that next level step up from the original Google Glasses, where it actually can send a video feed back to someone at a computer in real time. There's also has little disposable earbuds that can be connected so that the person who's walking through can actually hear the person at the computer on the other end. We actually do next day delivery of these through mail. They go through a complete disinfection process when they get sent back and get sent to the next client. Now, might not work for everyone, but that's a really cool advancement, right? And I want you to ask yourselves right now how much you think one of these costs, right? Kind of jot this number down mentally or emotionally and tell me if this number is higher or lower than you thought it was going to be. I think that's actually, all things considered, maybe this is not what, Balderson and Associates is going to buy tomorrow or what Evergreen Certified is going to be using on every job. But that's actually a price that's not that outrageous for the potential value for this technology. Let's rewind. Remember when I talked earlier about all the other reasons that we might not be able to get to a job site? What if something is very remote? What if we did have someone working for us who is wheelchair bound or is differently able and not physically able to get to the job site? Could this be the type of investment that actually helps ensure that the right people, the people with the right mind, people with the right attitude, the people with the right motivation are still playing a critical role in verifying our projects, that they're being done correctly, right? $899.99 is nothing to sneeze at, for sure. But when you think about the cost of an infrared camera, I remember when the company I worked for bought our first one, we bought the lowest grade possible that still qualified with ResNet at the time, and it was $12,000, right? So technology is changing so rapidly that something like this as an investment might be possible. Boy, that is just the start, right? Hopefully this is going to work for everyone. And I hope you guys can hear the really cool music. Otherwise, it's just me. So the quality of drones that they're showing here are typically in the $1,500 to $2,500 range for the drone. You do, of course, need to get the right software, and some of this stuff, there's additional costs that come along with it. But there are actually verification companies. Friends of mine that run a company called Energy Logic just outside of Berthoud, Colorado. Well, they don't do much underwater, but they use the air drone. Theirs cost them a little over $2,000. Another $1,000 or so for some of the software they had to purchase. But they're able to do some really cool stuff like this, be able to do mapping and 3D asset inspection with a drone. They currently use this most often when they need to inspect roof lines, vent caps, things like that on multifamily buildings, right? Where it's not going to be as easy to get on the roof, would require not just some basic ladders, but maybe scaffolding and a lot of ladder safety. And they find that this investment and some of the benefits of 3D mapping that it's been able to provide them is actually really terrific. So at any rate, don't need to watch the entire video, but you get the idea. Some of this drone stuff is really wicked cool and is a really cool next step. Now, it's easy for me to show you things that cost you money. That's not all there is that's out there. So there are basic tools and apps that also are available for everyone. And this would by the way, this would be a great time if you have a great tool or app or something that you're currently using that I'm not thinking about today that we can bring up at the discussion at the end. This would be a great time to be jotting that down. How many people here have heard about Radar Pro? If you've had anything to do with ResNet or Energy Star for the past 4 years, you've probably heard of Radar Pro. It is a pretty cool tool. I will say it's only used on tablets right now. And that's because the level of description that is on it is really hard on a lot of smartphones to really get the value out of it. But what's really great about this is a tool that assists in any rating or inspection. Now, you don't have to be doing Energy Star to do this. You do have to sign up for a My Energy Star account online, which is free, by the way, and they will give you a login to your My Energy Star account, and you can begin to use this tool. But it is really cool. And how the process works is you do your rating. Let's say you're using RemRate. You do your rating. You can then log into Radar Pro online on your computer, and you can import your home energy rating into Radar Pro, and it will come up with a custom inspection checklist for you based off of your projected rating file, right? Then you go out into the field. You do your inspection. You can take photos with it that are time-stamped and geolocated and connected to this house. Then when you get back, believe it or not, you can connect it back to your rating software, and it will automatically update your performance testing data. For instance, if you entered your blower door number, your duct leakage number, something like that, it can actually export back to your confirmed rating. Now that is pretty darn cool. And you don't have to be a genius to use this. Oh, I forgot about this. It does sync with some of the basic checklists, but you can do things like generate a punch list to send directly to a builder or a trade, right? And this one, they're like, please trim the insulation around the outlet. So you can generate a builder action report with something like this. So it really cuts down on office time after inspection because your reports are basically already built. You're already importing things back into your RemRate file. It's very cool. And like I said, you don't have to be a rocket surgeon to do this. It's pretty easy. It's now available on both Android tablet and on Apple tablets. And I can tell you it's easy. Pardon the quality of these photos. I took some screenshots of my tablet with my phone. So I was able to go online. I typed in Radar Pro in the App Store. There it was right at the top. Yep, I would like to install this. Boom, I've installed it. Now I just need to do my login and go through my Energy Star account. They call it your Mesa account. So this is a really cool tool. And I know a lot of you have probably heard of this, but I'm really curious, is anyone in the audience actually using this? I know another rating company, by the way, in Portland, Oregon. They're very computer savvy. They've effectively developed their own version of this that they can use on their smartphones, where they record up and upload any photos that they take. They can create custom checklists that they email to themselves and can use while they're in the field. So it doesn't have to be this tool, but isn't that a cool way to track everything? Again, geo-stamped and time-stamped and geolocated. I'll get that right eventually. How about this? Has anyone out there used the Fantastic software from Retrotech? What's great about this is you do your blower door test, you upload it to the cloud, and it will keep a record for every address that you put in, again, time-stamped and geolocated, with your blower door numbers and all of the settings that were set into your manometer as well. So you can generate reports for this. Effectively, you could have someone that was not at your company doing a blower door test using the software, and then you can track it. And as long as that person is also ResNet or BPI or qualified for whatever program you're in, that's a way that you can actually get that result back. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, Dan, I don't use Retrotech equipment, so that's lovely, but speak to me. Well, good news. Energy Conservatory also has their own very similar. And guess what? This app is free. Guess what else? The Fantastic Light app is free. The Radar Pro app is free. With each of these, you do need to have the right piece of equipment. You have to have the right manometer. So if you're using the really ancient manometers, not going to work. So you have to have the smarter Wi-Fi communicating DG1000 or DG700 gauge. You have to make sure it's Wi-Fi connected. But again, these will generate reports, includes the ResNet 380 testing standard as part of to make sure that you're actually testing to your standards. So you protect and test your test files, can be sent to, again, back to a builder or a trade ally so that people can actually get those results, or you can send them into a permit office or to your program. So these are all very different tools, or all different versions of similar tools that are really out there to help for those scenarios where maybe the rater of record can't be on the job site for whatever reason, but potentially someone else who's using these free pieces of software along with updated and current equipment can actually do tests that you can look and say, do I have confidence in the integrity of this test? This sure beats the days where someone just wrote down, 1,374 CFM50, and you're just supposed to believe that. You use these, and it actually is going to give you that. By the way, these two softwares are also really cool if you don't like having to translate between ACH 50 to ACH natural to CFM natural, or ALA or ELA. These software will do all of that for you as well. So not only do they help you track and record everything, they can do a lot of the translations for different standards with your software if you put in some basic inputs about the building. Bottom line, I keep mentioning this word integrity, right? Integrity, quality of being honest, right? In the state of being whole and undivided. At the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, are we maintaining our integrity if we're working in a world where we can't physically be on a job site, right? So with that, I think it's some time for discussion, and we're going to do this two different ways. We highly encourage you to raise your hand if you'd like to come up to the stage, and you can actually come up and we can get into a conversation. But we're also going to use the chat and Q&A functionality to see. And I'm really curious, what other ideas do folks have for ways that we can maintain integrity, and what are some of your personal stories, things that you've been going through, and how they apply to today?
So Dan, if you want to stop sharing your screen, that will allow people who raise their hand and want to come up to be bigger on the screen. And also, if you wanted to take a look at the Q&A section, I think it just took people some time to to get their motors going as far as what they wanted to know more about. So just wanted to call that to your attention.
So yeah, so John had asked the question about could data loggers play a role? And they absolutely can. And I think, something I didn't even mention, John, is there are some certifications, particularly net zero certifications, whether it's net zero water, carbon, or energy, where the certification actually doesn't happen until you've lived in the house for a period of time and been able to prove it, right? So data loggers or home energy monitoring and management systems are really good tools for being able to get either real-time or collated data over a period of time. And they can work really well. When I kind of hinted that there was something similar, that's what those virtual glasses that where you would send them out for someone is kind of like a visual data logger in a sense. With remote blower doors, I wasn't intending to suggest that this will do a remote blower door, but believe it or not, both Retrotech and Energy Conservatory do have equipment that once you set up a blower door, you can connect several together and run them remotely from a laptop. Now, by remotely, I usually mean from the parking lot or something like that. But if you're really trying to limit how many people are in a job site at once, or if you're doing, say, multifamily, where you want to run several blower doors simultaneously, you actually can use the computer software set up to do that. Someone brought up self-verification. And, self-verification can be valid and can meet integrity. But to me, the challenge with that is if builder A is self-verifying the building and builder B is using third party to do it, you have to ask that question of which of these sets of numbers inherently has greater integrity. Well, without calling into question every individual, you'd say the one with third party could. But could you pick out a assortment of items that could be self-verified? So there we go with the idea of could a builder or an insulator timestamp and geolocate a suite of pictures and send those to a verifier or a rater to say, I know you can't be out here and drywall's coming tomorrow. Can I take this series of pictures? And if you can give them the right direction of, I need to see these amount of pictures and I'd like your insulator to sign off on this statement that swears that all of this is up to speed. There are some level of that I think we can consider. And we've actually seen that happening during COVID, that some of the stuff, the performance testing, maybe we can't hand off, but some of the things that we can photo document and video document, absolutely, we probably can. Ooh, some really great questions. So, so some things that are, maybe not remote verification or things, but how about indoor air quality monitoring, right? It's really interesting. One of the roles of verification of a program, let me rephrase that. One of the benefits that we often state with program verification is improved indoor environmental quality. The problem is, as a verifier or rater, we're maybe at the job site, 2 to 4 times, maybe 5 times in a really complex job. But we're rarely there later, right? When the occupants or the people who are using the building are there. So this is a great place where either data loggers or real-time monitors that can communicate are great help. So purpleair.com, right? You can get their monitors, connect them to the internet, and you become part of a pretty terrific network that is looking at the indoor and outdoor air quality. And so it's a really cool way to do this. So if a homeowner or a building occupant is complaining of, it smells really smoky in my building, if you can't physically be there, there maybe are some pieces you could though do. You could have a monitoring system there that tracks indoor air quality. And you might have some real-time diagnostics and monitoring associated with the HVAC system where you could check things like, has the HVAC system been running? Has the ventilation system been running? Does the filter show that it's building up to so much static pressure that there must be something happening? So you could begin to piece together with a combination of advanced intention, great communication, and then the right tools. You could actually do some of this. You could really take a look and say, I can actually maybe diagnose to some level of enough to give you an idea of some things to try to see if that makes an improvement in your building. I would say there's some irony out there. Getting a building tight but not too tight, the building will actually work itself as a MERV 13 filter. And so I know this is counterintuitive. In our world, we want to build as tight as we possibly can and then ventilate right. But during a wildfire event, if you don't have really good filtration on your ventilation, you've got a really tight envelope, you turn on your ventilation system, and all of a sudden you have smoke in your house or your apartment or your workspace. If we tell you to turn off your ventilation, the indoor air quality will get poor for other reasons. As it turns out, homes that are somewhere in the 2.5 to 6 air changes per hour range, Linda Wigington did a study on this a number of years, maybe 4 years ago. It wasn't a huge study, maybe 6 or 7 houses, but they were located right next to a freeway. And so she was doing indoor air quality monitoring and actually found that those homes actually worked like a MERV 13 filter, ironically. Just that slight amount of natural ventilation that happened through building leakage, all the building components and the insulation in the building actually had some filtering effects. Weird, right? But you know what? We only know that because she tested. She tested some different theories, ventilation on, ventilation and filtration on, ventilation and filtration off, and was able to compare them and found that it was very similar with filtration to MERV 13 and the building doing its own filtration were actually very similar. Tom has a, could raters have an EPD for low carbon content of the rating? Boy, that is an interesting idea, isn't it? A friend of actually my boss, I had my annual review with him earlier today. Apparently I'm doing great. He was actually joking that they had to put extra solar panels on their house because they moved far enough away from the office that his regular commute, his personal carbon score went up. So they actually decided to put additional solar panels on the roof to help offset in their own minds. That now, obviously, his carbon impact has gone down working from home. But that is an interesting concept you could apply to this, that as a rater, that could be an option. We could put a maximum effort to reducing our carbon footprint to do your rating. It's an interesting idea and probably not a bad one. I haven't, there's an interesting question about the ability of a building to regenerate itself. And I'd kind of like to hear a little bit more about what we're thinking there. Is that there's regenerate, what has been put a lot of attention to, this addresses the materials comment earlier, is how do buildings recuperate from regular wetting and drying is one of the places where we're the most advanced in our science of understanding. And what we've learned is we've talked for years in the building science community about in a wall or in a roof cavity, what really matters is your drying potential. And while that is true, what also matters is what materials you used and how often the materials go through cycles of wetting and drying. Because after an X amount of time, and I want to say it's 10 years, but don't quote me on that. I just had a meeting on this on Friday, and I might have gotten the years wrong, but the typical OSB can be reduced as much as 10% in its strength with certain wall designs. And that's because while they do dry themselves back out, the process of wetting and drying, and that strength is the strength around nails and screws. And what they're using is they use this logic when someone tried to say that maybe we don't need to have quite as many nails or screws in a nailing or screw pattern for adhering OSB to the exterior in the international residential and international building codes. They're actually able to use real data to show that the structural strength around each individual nail head deteriorates over time when there's been a lot of wetting and drying. So in terms of buildings regenerating themselves, that would be one concept. Another concept would typically be around indoor air or indoor environmental quality. And this is where we start to see buildings with green walls or living ventilation systems that are designed to help the building recover and regenerate from levels of high carbon dioxide. So when you have events with a lot of occupancy, help them recover more quickly. But I'm curious if anybody wants to give any more feedback on what, if I'm missing something else about
And
what
you
that
could
meant.
you could invite people who ask a question if you want clarification. You could invite them to the stage. That was Christina who asked about regeneration.
Christina, if you'd like to come up and share, you're more than welcome to, or you can continue to type in questions if I didn't quite address it. Tom is saying, yeah, too bad we can't also claim utility savings for, back to that, on a low carbon rater, wouldn't it be great if we could claim utility savings for not having to actually go across the state to do a blower door test for someone? All right, maybe we're not quite there yet, Tom. And I don't think that me, air shipping a pair of Google glasses across the United States really takes care of that either. But it is an interesting set of concepts. And now we're starting to drill in, right? There are a lot of different ways that we can consider this. And integrity is not just about the integrity of the building or of the certification. It's our own personal and our professional integrity that we also are thinking about as we bring this stuff up. We are getting, let's see. And then my thoughts on the future of how raters can help reduce the embodied energy and carbon in buildings? That's a great question, John. And I think, you know, if we go all the way back to those first couple slides of the roles of the building scientist or the rater in a construction project, I think Tom is onto something. You could do your utmost to have the lowest carbon footprint as a rater, and that would be considered a part of the build process, right? Everything that happened to it. So that would be a small element, but that's something everyone could do tomorrow, is to start thinking that way. But really dialing back, a rater can develop good relationships within the materials, products, manufacturer, and distribution chains to have the best understanding of what products that are being brought forth contribute the most to our energy use, our carbon, our water use, and being able to have that discussion with the builder to say, let's talk about the pros and cons of your decision here. Here's your first cost decision, right? And we know that people are going to consider that whether we wish they did or not. That's going to happen. But let's also take a look at some other things. Let's take a look at the impact of sequencing, how easy it is to get the materials. Let's take a look at the carbon, embodied carbon of the materials choices. That's one way you can do it. Another way is to move away from things that have high embodied carbon in their as a fuel or a fuel transportation element. So either getting natural gas products that are triple the current efficiency or potentially not using them at all, and taking electric equipment and getting refrigerants that have, let's say, 1/10 the global warming potential of the refrigerant, and actually getting more stringent allowances on how much refrigerant is allowed to leak out of any one device. Believe it or not, the EPA actually has some built-in estimates of how much refrigerant leaks from the average piece of equipment over time. So you could see some stringency there. Now, I know that in a lot of ways that's operational, but it's inherent in the fact that you decided to make that decision to build it in. So that discussion between the embodied part and the operational part, this is operational and embodied kind of together, because you're making the decision whether to include it or not from the very beginning. So I think having all of those discussions as a rater. Now, if you're working with John Alexander, he has a lot of this knowledge as well, but not every builder is Sunshine Construction, right? If you're working for a production builder who it's their first foray into doing built green, maybe these are some things where you can have some really terrific discussions by expanding your knowledge base would be one of the things, and then really helping builders have a different scorecard that they use when they're making some of their decisions. Another comment that was brought up from Helen is this difference between meeting standards and best practices. It's a great question, and I actually broke my own rule by using the term best practices in this. I'm not a fan of actually using the term best practices. I would prefer to say that I have a term called quality, which is meeting agreed upon standards, whatever they are. And then there are recommended practices. And the reason I don't like best practices is it can take opinion into account, for one thing. And second, as things naturally change over time, what was written as a best practice sometimes 18 months ago is no longer best because there's something new on the market already. So when you write best practices and you have them printed as such, they can pretty quickly lose their flavor. Whereas a recommended practice stays the recommended practice until the body that manages that standard determines to update it. So I'm a bigger fan of saying, understand and use quality to say meeting agreed upon standards, and that's between the builder, the rater, the program, the code official, the citywide policy, the state carbon goals, right? That's how, those are the standards that you're going to agree upon before, and quality means you met them. And then recommended practices are how you do it. Now there are levels, right? You can choose to go above the minimum. So your agreed upon standards could be Built Green Emerald level, could be International Living Future Institute net zero carbon, in which case quality is meeting that standard, and the recommended practices to do it are how you get there. So interesting discussion. Effective communication strategies. Boy, we're after 5, but I do want to just bring this up. I do think that getting to a place and time where we are making our communications, what's the best way to say this? One unintended consequence of the current COVID scenario is we're all becoming used to doing Zoom happy hours, right? So on one sense, we're starting to see a proliferation of even my fiance, who would consider herself, technologically, she's like, I got a grade D in computers in college, right? She doesn't consider herself very technologically advanced. She can figure out Zoom, Google Meets, all of that now. So we're getting to a place where some parts of communication, being able to be a little bit more face-to-face and be a little more willing to do some things remotely, those things are progressing. But I do think we also need to get to a point where we don't rely on technobabble. It's really easy in technological things, getting rid of as much technobabble as possible, really beginning to learn and appreciate communication styles and how people communicate based off of their own living experiences and their cultural differences. Those are also becoming critical. So learning to think that way is the first step towards really improving our communication. On costs, again, I will only say this: first, cost is important, and increasing the cost of your rating has an impact. But again, being able to show that you can help a builder or a program maintain integrity at the most competitive cost imaginable, and taking into consideration the value of the cost of living in that home or working in that building over time. Those are some things that need to be changed in terms of some people's ability to appreciate. So we need to expand what we mean by cost. And I am one of the people that believes we should be using the term cost competitive as opposed to cost effective in order to really address things, because times do change and costs can go up and can go down. But is it worth it? That's that value proposition I mentioned earlier. You have to sell the value for it. We are actually 5:05. We're doing great. I don't want to hold people up too much. And I think we've really gotten basically to all the questions. If anyone wanted to come up, I'm happy to have them come up and we can chat. Boy, there's some other chats that came into carbon disclosures, things like that are great ideas. Basically having a disclosure policy as a verifier, disclosing whether or not you make money on this project doing anything other than ratings is where it should start. That should be a minimum. But then disclosing the efforts that you put in towards JEDI, Justly, Diversity, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, what you put in for carbon accounting. Those are also great disclosures that I think every business is going to learn is going to be important over time.
Hey, Dan, just as a reminder, if we want to, it might be easier to round the discussion back at the table at the networking session so that you can go to your table, which accommodates, I think, 8 folks,
Great.
And you can see everybody in picture view all at once. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Cool.